Welcome back to Bargirl Baddies. Today's story is different because it's not from the guy who got played, it's from his father, a 62-year-old retired contractor from Houston, Texas, named Robert Mitchell, who watched his only son drain his life savings for a woman he'd never met in person. A freelancer working the online dating scene between Bangkok and Pattaya, Robert thought he'd raised his boy smarter than this. Thought 26 was old enough to see through an obvious scam, but love, or whatever passes for it, makes people stupid at any age. So when his son Jake maxed out his credit cards, took out loans he couldn't repay, and started talking about selling his truck for one more wire transfer, Robert did what any father would do. He booked a flight to Thailand, not to save his son, but to find the woman who was destroying him and make damn sure she never did it to anyone else's kid. This is a story about parental rage, about the limits of protection, about flying halfway around the world to confront a ghost, and about the brutal moment when you realise the person you're really fighting is the one you came to save. Drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. And if you've ever watched someone you love get scammed and felt that same helpless fury, hit that like button and subscribe. Because this one hits different when it's your own blood being bled dry. Robert Mitchell had done everything right, or thought he had. Raised Jake as a single father after his wife Linda died of breast cancer when the boy was 12. Worked double shifts doing commercial electrical contracting to keep Jake in decent schools, make sure he had what he needed, teach him the value of hard work and common sense. Jake had grown up solid, not brilliant, but dependable. Got his certification as an HVAC technician, bought himself a used F-150, rented a small house in Cyprus, dated a few local girls but nothing serious. Robert had watched his son build a modest but stable life and felt the quiet pride of a father who'd done his job. The kind of pride that doesn't need to be spoken, just sits warm in your chest when you see your kid making rent on time and showing up to Sunday dinner without drama. Then the pandemic hit, and something in Jake shifted. The isolation, the months of working alone on job sites, or not working at all, the endless scrolling through screens, the algorithm feeding him content he never asked for but couldn't stop watching. Robert started noticing Jake talking about Thailand, about guys his age living there on nothing, about how American women were too demanding and foreign women appreciated a good man. Robert had brushed it off as a phase, the kind of thing young men say when they're frustrated and lonely. But then Jake showed him her profile. Her name was Mint, or that's what she called herself, online. 23 years old, from Bangkok, studying at university, worked part-time at her family's restaurant. Her photos showed a beautiful Thai girl with a sweet smile, always in casual clothes, nothing provocative, just normal pictures of someone living their life. She'd messaged Jake first on some international dating app. Said she thought he looked kind, that she was practicing her English and hoped they could be friends. The conversation had started innocent enough, just chatting about their days, their cultures, sharing music and memes, the kind of low-stakes connection that feels safe because there's an ocean between you. 3 months in, Jake told Robert he thought he was in love. Robert's stomach had dropped, but he'd tried to stay measured. Asked the careful questions. Had they video called? Yes, a few times, though her internet was bad, so it was always choppy. Had she asked for money? No, never. She actually seemed embarrassed whenever Jake offered to help with anything. Was Jake thinking of visiting? Maybe, eventually, but she said she wanted to finish university first, didn't want him to waste money on a trip when she was so busy with classes. Robert had wanted to believe it was real because Jake seemed happy for the first time in years, had purpose, would come over for Sunday dinner talking about Mint's Day or something funny she'd said, showing Robert messages like proud evidence of connection. And maybe it was real, or real enough for those first months before the cracks started showing. The thing about scams is they don't start with demands. They start with connection, with someone seeing you, with conversations that fill the exact shape of your loneliness. Jake had been isolated for months, working jobs where he barely spoke to anyone, coming home to an empty house, scrolling through dating apps where American women either ignored him or unmatched after 2 messages. Then here was Mint, beautiful and kind and genuinely interested, asking about his day, laughing at his jokes, sending good morning messages with little heart emojis that made him feel like someone on the other side of the world was thinking about him. Robert had seen it happen, but hadn't known how to stop it. How do you tell your son that the first person to make him feel valued in years is probably fake? How do you break that without breaking him? The request started small and wrapped in crisis. Mint's father got sick, needed medicine the family couldn't afford. Jake sent $300. Mint's motorbike got stolen, and she needed it to get to university and work. Jake sent $800. Mint's tuition was due and her parents couldn't cover it this semester. She might have to drop out. Jake sent $2,000. Each time she'd protest, say it was too much, promise to pay him back, send him photos of receipts or her father in a hospital bed or her university payment portal. Each time, Jake would tell Robert about it with this defensive pride, like he was proving something, that he was the kind of man who took care of his woman even from 8,000 miles away. Robert had tried talking sense into him, gently at first, said it sounded fishy, that maybe Jake should slow down, make sure this was real before sending more money. Jake had gotten defensive immediately, said Robert didn't understand, that Mint was different, that she never asked for anything, that these were emergencies, and what kind of man would he be if he didn't help? Robert had backed off, hoping it would fizzle out naturally, that Jake would see the pattern on his own. But the requests didn't stop. They escalated. Over the next 6 months, Jake liquidated everything. His savings account, gone. $12,000 he'd been putting away since he was 18, meant for a future house or truck upgrade or wedding someday. His credit cards, maxed out at $30,000 across 4 different accounts. A personal loan from his bank for $15,000 that he'd somehow qualified for despite barely working. Money borrowed from friends he'd never be able to repay. Awkward requests that ended friendships when Jake couldn't pay them back. He sold his truck, the F-150 he'd saved 2 years to buy, sold it for $8,000 to some teenager on Craigslist because he needed cash fast. Sold his tools, his entire HVAC kit that he needed for work, sold them for pennies on the dollar. Sold his dead mother's jewelry, pieces Robert had given him to save for his own future wife. Heirlooms that couldn't be replaced. Every dollar went to Thailand, to Mint, for emergencies that never stopped coming. Her mother needed surgery. Her brother got arrested and needed bail money. The family restaurant was failing and they'd lose everything without an investor. Mint herself got sick, needed expensive treatment, sent photos from a hospital bed that reverse image search would later reveal were stock photos from a medical website. Robert watched his son disappear into the scam like watching someone drown in slow motion. Jake stopped showing up for work, got fired after missing too many shifts and showing up late and distracted when he did come in, stopped paying rent, got evicted from his little house in Cyprus after 3 months of non-payment, moved into Robert's spare bedroom at 26 years old with nothing but a duffel bag of clothes and a phone he stared at 18 hours a day. He'd lost weight, looked hollow around the eyes, snapped at Robert for any perceived criticism of Mint, spent his days trying to figure out how to make more money to send to her because she needed him, because they were planning a future, because she promised once things stabilized she'd come to America and they'd get married, and he just needed to help her through this rough patch. Robert tried everything, showed Jake articles about romance scams, statistics about how common this was, testimonials from other men who'd been through exactly this and lost everything. Jake called it propaganda, said those guys were probably assholes who deserved it, that his situation was different because Mint was real and they had something special. Robert tried being hard, told Jake he was being an idiot, that no woman who actually loved him would take this much money without ever meeting in person. Jake had exploded, screamed that Robert never wanted him to be happy, that Robert was bitter and alone and couldn't stand seeing his son find love. Robert tried being soft, told Jake he was worried, that he loved him, that he just wanted to make sure Jake was protected. Jake had cried and promised he knew what he was doing, that Mint was the one, that Robert would understand when he finally met her. Nothing worked. Jake was gone, replaced by this desperate shell who only cared about the next wire transfer, the next crisis, the next chance to prove his love to someone he'd never touched. The breaking point came on a Wednesday afternoon in October. Robert came home from a job site, still in his work clothes covered in dust, and found Jake on his laptop at the kitchen table. He was on a payday loan website, one of those predatory ones with 400% interest, trying to take out another high-interest loan using Robert's address as his residence. Robert asked what the hell he was doing. Jake broke down completely, crying like he hadn't since his mother's funeral, shoulders heaving, snot running down his face, the ugly kind of crying that comes from somewhere deep and broken. Said Mint's father was dying and needed an operation that cost $10,000, and if Jake didn't send it she'd lose her whole family and it would be his fault, his failure as a man, as a partner, as someone who claimed to love her. Robert had felt something shift in his chest, not worry anymore, not even sadness, just pure, focused rage. His son was gone, hollowed out and replaced by this desperate shell. And somewhere in Thailand was a person who'd done this to him, was still doing it, was probably laughing about it with whoever she really was. Probably had 5 other japes sending money for 5 other fake emergencies. Probably didn't even remember his name, just knew him as the American guy who kept paying. Robert had grabbed the laptop, slammed it shut, and told Jake he was done enabling this. Said he wouldn't let Jake take out another loan, wouldn't let him use this address for anything, wouldn't give him another dollar until he got his head straight. Jake had begged, pleaded, said Robert was killing Mint's father, that her whole family would suffer because Robert was too stubborn to help. Robert had walked away before he said something he couldn't take back. That night, lying awake at 2 a.m, listening to Jake sob through the wall, Robert made a decision he knew was stupid, possibly dangerous, definitely pointless. But he couldn't just sit in Houston watching his son disintegrate. He couldn't call the police. He'd already tried. Talked to a detective who'd been sympathetic but clear that unless you had concrete evidence and could identify the real person behind the account and prove intent to defraud, there was nothing they could do. Said thousands of Americans got scammed this way every year, and almost none of them ever got justice or their money back. Said the best thing Robert could do was cut Jake off financially and hope he hit bottom before he did something worse. He couldn't hire a private investigator. Robert had looked into it, gotten quotes of $5,000 just to start, no guarantees of finding anything, and Robert didn't have that kind of money to throw away on what would probably be a dead end anyway. But he could get on a plane. He could go to Thailand, track down this Mint or whoever she really was, and at minimum make sure she knew that Jake wasn't just a faceless ATM, that he was a real person with a real father who'd flown across the world to look her in the eye and tell her exactly what she'd done. It was revenge fantasy, vigilante bullshit, old man rage with a plane ticket. Robert knew that. His rational brain was screaming that this was a waste of money and time, that he'd accomplish nothing, that he'd probably never find her. And even if he did, what was he going to do? Yell at her? But he booked the flight anyway. He used his credit card to buy a one-way ticket to Bangkok, told himself he'd figure out the return later. Spent 3 days pulling every piece of information he could from Jake's phone while his son was sleeping or in the bathroom. Screenshots of conversations, photos Mint had sent, the name of her supposed university, the area where she claimed her family restaurant was located, details about a mall she'd mentioned shopping at, anything that might be a real lead. It wasn't much. Probably wouldn't lead anywhere. But it was something to do besides sit at home watching Jake destroy himself, one wire transfer at a time. Robert told Jake he was going on a fishing trip with some old buddies from work, would be unreachable for a week, up in the hill country where cell service was spotty. Jake had barely looked up from his phone, just nodded and asked if Robert could leave his credit card just in case of emergency. Robert had said no, locked his wallet in his truck's glove box, packed a single carry-on bag with a week's worth of clothes, left a note on the kitchen counter with the number for a crisis hotline and the address of a gambling addiction support group. Because even if this wasn't gambling, the addiction looked the same. Then he drove to Bush Intercontinental Airport, parked in long term, and got on a plane to Bangkok with no real plan beyond finding the woman who'd destroyed his son and making sure she knew his name. Robert landed at Suvarnabhumi Airport on a humid November morning with nothing but a carry-on bag, a hotel reservation in Bangkok, and a list of information he pulled from Jake's phone while his son was sleeping. Mint's supposed university, the area where she claimed her family's restaurant was located, a few photos, and the name of a mall where she'd said she liked to shop. It wasn't much, probably wouldn't lead anywhere, but it was something to do besides sit at home watching Jake destroy himself one wire transfer at a time. Bangkok hit him like a wall of heat and noise and otherness. The moment he stepped out of the air-conditioned airport into the arrivals area, the humidity wrapped around him like a wet blanket. It was 7 in the morning and already had to be 90 degrees, the air thick enough to chew. Robert had been to Mexico a few times, Cancun and Cabo on vacation with Linda before she got sick, but this was different. The scale of it, the chaos, the feeling of being completely and utterly out of place. The taxi line was a mess of shouting drivers and confused tourists, and Robert ended up paying probably triple what he should have for a ride to his hotel in Sukhumvit. The driver spoke maybe 10 words of English, and Robert spoke 0 Thai. So they rode in silence through highway traffic that made Houston look calm. Motorcycles weaving between cars, buses belching black smoke, the whole city seeming to vibrate with frantic energy. His hotel was a budget place he'd found online, the kind that had clean sheets and hot water, but nothing else. The room was tiny, just a bed and a bathroom, and a window that looked out at another building 3 feet away. Robert dropped his bag, stood under a cold shower for 20 minutes trying to wash off the flight, then sat on the bed staring at his phone with no idea what to do next. He'd flown halfway around the world on rage and instinct. Now that he was here, the stupidity of it was settling in like a weight on his chest. The first day was mostly just trying to orient himself. Fighting jet lag that hit like a hammer around 2 in the afternoon, walking the neighborhood around his hotel, because sitting still felt impossible, eating street food that his stomach wasn't ready for, getting aggressively lost trying to navigate a city where he couldn't read the signs. Every white face he passed looked hollow-eyed and desperate or smugly comfortable, and Robert wondered which category he fell into, the fool or the predator. That night, he lay awake watching Thai TV he couldn't understand, thinking about Jake back in Houston, probably messaging Mint right now about some new crisis, probably wondering why his dad wasn't answering his texts about needing money. Robert had left his phone in airplane mode, couldn't deal with the guilt of seeing Jake's messages pile up. The investigation, if you could call it that, started the next morning with the university. Mint had claimed she studied business at Chulalongkorn University, one of the top schools in Thailand. Robert had looked it up, found out it was prestigious, the Harvard of Southeast Asia basically, which should have been the first red flag that a bargirl working her way through school wouldn't be studying there. But Jake had believed it, had been proud even, bragging to Robert about how smart his girlfriend was. Robert took a taxi to the campus, a sprawling complex of old and new buildings that covered entire blocks of the city. He walked around feeling completely out of place, past groups of students in uniforms, through courtyards where kids sat studying or eating lunch, trying to figure out where to even start. He eventually found an administration building, walked into an office where a woman behind a desk looked up at him with patient curiosity. Robert explained his situation as simply as he could, said he was looking for a student named Mint, that his son had been sending her money and he just wanted to verify she was actually enrolled here. The woman's expression shifted to something Robert had seen before, pity mixed with recognition. She'd dealt with this exact situation before, probably dozens of times. She asked if he had a last name, a student ID number, anything concrete. Robert showed her the photos, said this was all he had. She checked the computer system anyway, typed in variations of the name, came back shaking her head. No one by that name enrolled currently, not in the past 5 years. Had Robert considered that Mint might not be her real name, that the whole story about university might be fabricated? Robert thanked her and left, walking back through campus feeling stupid for even trying. Of course she wasn't enrolled. Of course it was all lies. But seeing it confirmed, having someone official tell him what he'd already known, somehow made it worse. The restaurant was next on his list. Mint had said it was in the Thonglor area, a family place serving traditional Thai food, had even sent photos of dishes she claimed were from their menu. Beautiful pictures of pad thai and green curry and som tam. Always with the same excuse that she was too busy helping her parents to video chat properly. Robert spent 2 full days walking through Thonglor, checking every restaurant, every food stall, every hole in the wall place that looked like it might be family-owned. His feet blistered in shoes that weren't meant for this much walking in this much heat. He showed Mint's photos to owners and servers, most of whom didn't speak enough English to understand what he was asking. Some who understood perfectly and just shook their heads. One older Thai woman who ran a noodle shop had pulled Robert aside after he showed her the photos. She'd studied his face for a moment, then spoke in broken but clear English. "Your son has girlfriend in Thailand?" Robert nodded. "She sent him picture, asked for money, say she love him but never meet." Robert nodded again. The woman had sighed, this deep, weary sound like she'd seen this story 1,000 times. She told Robert he should go home, that his son's girlfriend was probably working in Pattaya or Phuket, that the girl in the photos might not even be the girl he was talking to, that this was business, and he was wasting his time looking for revenge on someone who didn't exist. Robert had wanted to argue but couldn't. Everything she said lined up with what the expats in the Facebook group had been telling him, what the police had told him, what his own gut had been screaming, that he'd come this far and wasn't ready to quit yet. That night, sitting in a bar drinking Singha beer that tasted like watered down nothing, Robert had connected with the Facebook group he'd joined before leaving Houston, posted Mint's photos, explained the situation, asked if anyone recognized her or had advice on how to track someone down in Thailand. The responses came in fast. Some sympathetic, saying they'd been through similar situations. Most cynical, saying Robert was wasting his time and money, that girls like Mint were professionals who covered their tracks, that even if he found her, it wouldn't bring Jake's money back or snap him out of the delusion. A few offered to help for a fee, which Robert couldn't afford and didn't trust anyway. But one message stood out. A British guy named Colin who'd lived in Thailand for 15 years. He said the photos looked professional, the kind freelancers used on dating apps, high quality but generic enough to not be traceable. Said the girl might be working independently online, never actually meeting clients in person, which made her almost impossible to track because she could be anywhere, could be anyone. But Colin also said if Robert really wanted to try, he should check Pattaya. Said it was only 2 hours south of Bangkok, that the freelancer scene there was huge. Girls working the apps and websites without being tied to any specific bar or establishment. Said if Mint was real, if she actually existed as a person and not just a stolen identity, Pattaya was where she'd probably be. Robert booked a bus ticket that same night. The ride south was 2 hours through industrial sprawl that gradually gave way to resort development, shopping centres and condo towers, rising up from what probably used to be fishing villages. Robert watched it all pass by the window, thinking about how many guys had made this exact trip, following the same trail of breadcrumbs, looking for girls who existed more vividly in messages than in reality. Pattaya hit different than Bangkok. Where Bangkok felt like a real city that happened to have a sex industry, Pattaya felt like a sex industry that happened to have a city built around it. The whole place had this faded resort vibe, like someone had thrown a massive party in 1985 and just never cleaned up. Instead, just kept adding more bars and clubs and massage parlours to the wreckage. Robert checked into a guest house near the beach. Nothing fancy, just a room with a bed and a fan, and a window that looked out at the street. He could hear music thumping from somewhere nearby, could smell grilled meat and cigarette smoke and sea salt all mixing together in the humid air. He spent the first evening just walking, trying to understand the geography of the place. Beach road running along the water, lined with hotels and restaurants and groups of girls on motorcycles calling out to passing men. Walking Street, the infamous strip that didn't really come alive until after dark, already starting to pulse with neon even at 7 in the evening. Soi Buakau, where the long-term expats seemed to congregate, cheaper bars and restaurants where old white guys sat drinking beer and complaining about visa requirements. Robert showed Mint's photo to anyone who'd look. Bar girls smoking cigarettes outside clubs, motorcycle taxi drivers waiting for fares, staff at 7-Eleven, other tourists who looked at him with either pity or suspicion. Most just shrugged or shook their heads. Some studied the photo longer, exchanged glances with their friends, these little knowing looks that made Robert feel like they recognised her, but weren't going to say. One girl working outside a beer bar on Soi 6 had looked at the photo for a long time, then asked Robert in decent English how much his son had sent. When Robert said he didn't know exactly, maybe $50,000, she'd laughed. Not meanly, but with genuine surprise, said your son is good man in this tone that made Robert's blood boil because she meant it as a compliment. Like Jake was a generous customer rather than a victim. 3 days into Pattaya, Robert was ready to admit defeat. He'd walked every major street, shown the photo to hundreds of people, gotten nothing but dead ends and knowing smiles. He'd connected with a few expats who'd offered to keep an eye out, but didn't seem particularly optimistic. He'd even hired a local guy named Noi, who claimed to know everyone in the freelancer scene, paid him 2,000 baht to ask around, and got back nothing useful. Robert was sitting at a beachside bar in the late afternoon, drinking Singer and watching the sun start its descent over the Gulf of Thailand, accepting that this whole trip had been a waste. He wasn't going to find her. Even if he did find someone using Mint's photos, it probably wasn't the person actually talking to Jake. The woman at the noodle shop had been right. He was chasing a ghost that didn't want to be found, and probably didn't exist in any meaningful way. He'd flown across the world on rage and accomplished nothing except confirming what everyone had already told him. That Jake was one of thousands. That the scam was too distributed and anonymous to fight. That the only person he could actually save was Jake himself. And Jake didn't want to be saved. Robert finished his beer, was about to head back to his guest house to figure out flights home, when he saw her. Or someone who looked enough like her that his heart stopped, walking along Beach Road in the fading light, talking on her phone, wearing jeans and a simple black t-shirt, looking nothing like the bar girls in their club wear and heels. But the face was right, the hair was right, even the way she walked matched the couple of choppy video calls Jake had shown him. Robert stood up so fast he knocked his chair over. He left money on the table and followed her down Beach Road, keeping maybe 20 meters back, his heart hammering in his chest, hands shaking with adrenaline. She walked past the main tourist areas into a quieter section, past a few local restaurants and a small temple, completely unaware she was being followed. She turned into a small cafe, one of those independent places that looked like it catered more to Thai customers than tourists, ordered something at the counter, then sat down at an outdoor table still talking on her phone, laughing at something whoever she was talking to had said. Robert approached slowly, stood in front of her table, and said the name his son had been whispering like a prayer for a year and a half. Mint. She looked up from her phone, and Robert saw it immediately. The flash of recognition, the quick calculation behind her eyes, the brief moment of panic before her face smoothed into polite confusion. She said something in Thai, shook her head, pointed to herself, and said a different name, Ploy, something like that. Said she didn't speak much English. Sorry, wrong person. Gestured apologetically like she wanted to help but couldn't. But Robert had seen enough in that first moment. He pulled out his phone, hands still shaking, pulled up a screenshot of her conversation with Jake, the same profile picture, the same messages asking for money, talking about her sick father, her university classes, her family's restaurant. He showed her the screen. The girl's face changed instantly. The polite confusion dropped like a mask. Her eyes went hard, calculating, and when she spoke again, her English was suddenly fluent. She told Robert to go away. Said she didn't know who Jake was. Said lots of girls used similar photos, that he couldn't prove anything, that he was harassing her, and she'd call the police if he didn't leave. Robert sat down anyway. For the first time in this whole stupid journey, he didn't yell, didn't threaten, didn't demand anything. He just talked, told her about Jake, about who he was before all this started, before the pandemic and the isolation and the algorithm that fed him videos about Thailand until he believed the fantasy, about watching his son disintegrate over 18 months. The savings gone, the debt, the job lost, the friendships burned, the hollow-eyed shell Jake had become. He showed her photos on his phone. Jake is a baby, gap-toothed and laughing. Jake's high school graduation. Jake with his mother Linda, 3 months before she died, both of them trying to smile for the camera. Jake in his work uniform standing next to his truck, back when he still had both, looking proud and solid and real. He told her about Linda's jewelry, how Jake had sold his dead mother's wedding ring and necklace for $800 to send to Thailand for an emergency that probably didn't exist. How that had hurt worse than all the money combined, knowing Jake had traded his mother's memory for another lie. He asked her if she was Mint or knew Mint or was part of whatever network this was, to please just stop, to block Jake, to let him move on. Because whatever money was left to take wasn't worth what it was doing to a human being. The girl listened with an expression Robert couldn't read. She put her phone down, was giving him her full attention, but her face was neutral, professional almost, like she was listening to a business proposal rather than a father's desperate plea. When Robert finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she leaned forward and said something that Robert would replay in his head for months afterward, that would haunt him more than anything else from this entire trip. Your son is not a victim. He chose this. He wanted to be hero, wanted to save poor Thai girl, wanted to feel important. I gave him that feeling. That is the product. The money is just payment. If not me, would be another girl, another story. You cannot save him from yourself. She stood up, put a 100 baht note on the table for her coffee, and walked away. Just like that. Didn't look back. Didn't apologize. Didn't acknowledge anything Robert had said about Jake's humanity or pain or loss. Robert sat there as the sun set over Pattaya Bay, watching families play in the surf, couples walking hand in hand, the city's neon starting to flicker to life like a machine powering up for another night. The cafe owner came out and asked if he wanted anything else. Robert shook his head, left money on the table, walked back to his guest house in the dark. That night, he lay on the thin mattress staring at the ceiling fan spinning overhead, replaying what she'd said. Your son is not a victim. He chose this. And the worst part was, she was right. Jake hadn't been tricked or manipulated or stolen from. He'd been offered a product, the feeling of being needed, of being important, of being someone's hero. And he bought it willingly, eagerly, had kept buying it even when every rational person in his life told him it was fake, because the feeling was more important than the reality. Because being someone's savior from 8,000 miles away was easier than building an actual life in Houston. Robert flew back 3 days later, took a bus to Bangkok, caught a flight with a 12-hour layover in Tokyo, Landed at Bush Intercontinental at 6 in the morning, Houston time, feeling like he'd aged 10 years in 2 weeks. Jake was still in the spare bedroom when Robert got home, still on his phone, still existing in that parallel universe where Mint was real and their future was just one more wire transfer away. Robert tried one more time to talk to him, told him about the trip, about Bangkok and Pattaya, about finding the girl and what she'd said. Jake called him a liar, said Robert had gone to Thailand to sabotage his relationship because Robert couldn't stand seeing him happy, said Mint would never say those things, that Robert probably talked to some random girl and decided it was her because he wanted an excuse to break them up. Said Robert was jealous and controlling, and that's probably why Mom died young, from the stress of being married to someone so negative. That last part cut deeper than anything. Robert had just stood there taking it, watching his son transform love into a weapon, watching 26 years of raising him alone dissolve into this moment of pure hatred. Robert had walked away. Didn't argue. Didn't defend himself. Just told Jake he had 1 month to find a job and a place to live, that the spare bedroom wasn't permanent, that he loved him but couldn't watch this anymore. Jake moved out 2 weeks later, found a room in a shitty apartment with 3 other guys, got a part-time job delivering food for DoorDash, and as far as Robert knew, was still sending every spare dollar to Thailand, still believing in a future that would never come, still defending Mint to anyone who questioned her. They didn't talk anymore. Jake had blocked Robert's number, had told other family members that Robert had tried to ruin his life, had rewritten the entire narrative so he was the victim and Robert was the villain. And maybe that was easier. Maybe Jake needed Robert to be the bad guy, because accepting the truth would mean accepting that he'd destroyed his own life for a fantasy, and that was too heavy to carry. So that's Robert's story. And if you're a parent watching your kid make terrible decisions, sending money to someone they've never met, defending the indefensible because they need the dream more than the truth, this one's for you. You're not alone in that helpless rage. You're not wrong to feel it, but you also can't fix it, no matter how far you're willing to travel or how much you're willing to fight. The only thing you can do is set boundaries, protect yourself, and hope that someday, maybe, they'll wake up on their own. If you've been through something similar, whether as the parent, the friend, or the person who had to learn the hard way, drop it in the comments. Share this video if you know someone heading down this path. And remember, sometimes the person running the scam isn't the villain in the story. Sometimes they're just the mirror showing you what you wanted to see all along. Thanks for watching Bargirl Baddies. Hit subscribe for more stories about the gap between what we want to believe and what actually is. And remember, you can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved, but you can save yourself from going down with them. See you next time.